Sainz was victorious, Red Bull faltered, and Russell fumbled this weekend in Singapore. So I asked you for your hottest takes from the 2023 Singapore Grand Prix, and I'm not sure my tongue will ever recover. David says Carlos is still criminally underrated, keeps flying under the radar and delivering. I have to agree, I think he is underrated, especially compared to the likes of Lando Norris or Charles Leclerc or George Russell. He's never really grouped with those drivers, and I think it's mainly because he's in a Ferrari car which is better suited to qualifying over the last couple of years, where he is much better in the races. But since the summer break, he has been absolutely on fire. 5th place in the Netherlands, where that Ferrari was dreadful. 3rd place in Monza and closest to the Red Bulls, and then wins here in Singapore. He just seems so comfortable in that Ferrari car right now and builds from session to session and comes alive in the Grand Prix. The strategy and calmness under pressure he showed was immense, and then he was more than deserving of this victory and his 2nd victory in Formula 1. Haida says Sainz greater than Leclerc. I feel like this is actually a trickier battle than most people think. If you look at the 3 seasons they've had together, 2021 was the first season Carlos Sainz was in the Ferrari and he outscored Charles Leclerc. Then last season, Leclerc was by far and away the main man of the team. He really hit the ground running in the new regulations where Sainz struggled. But then this season, it's been very close between the two of them. They've been fairly evenly matched. I mean, you look at the last 2 races, Charles Leclerc finished just behind in Monza, but put Sainz under a lot of pressure. And then Charles Leclerc was very unlucky with traffic in Singapore and probably would have finished in and around where his teammate did too. So they are very closely matched at this moment in time, and I think this battle is closer than people give credit. Buffy says Mercedes was sacrificing Russell for a Hamilton podium. Now that is an incredibly hot take. I wouldn't say that they sacrificed him. That would have been some crazy team orders if Toto Wolff got on the radio and was like, George, if you wouldn't mind smashing it into the wall so Lewis can have a go at Lando, that would be amazing. I think that would be a crazy team radio to happen and definitely something that we'll never ever see. But Russell throwing it into the wall at the end just shows that he's still not quite at the elite level for me. I know he's pushing incredibly hard. He's desperate to win. He's so frustrated by Sainz and Norris. Like, he can see Carlos Sainz right there. His 2nd win in Formula 1 is on the cards in a season where Red Bull have been so dominant. He might not get another chance this year. And the tiniest lapse in concentration means that he goes into the wall, and it's sometimes the difference between the elite drivers and the drivers just behind is those tiny little moments. And I think this is going to be a big learning point for George Russell. Of course, I have to throw in a hot take of my own. I've gone for the fact that Lewis Hamilton would have pushed for the win had he not been behind George Russell. Now, I know that Hamilton struggled to get comfortable with the Mercedes this weekend and qualified 4/10 behind George Russell, so he was rightfully behind his teammate in terms of pace. But when it came to the race performance, Lewis Hamilton just felt a lot stronger. Okay, he was a bit cheeky at the start, tried to make up a couple of positions. He was never going to be able to hold on to those and eventually did give them back. But after the 2nd pit stop, where they brought in the Mercedes cars for the fresh medium tyres, he looked so much quicker than Russell. And I just back Lewis Hamilton that if he was behind Lando Norris, he would have been able to get just that little extra tenth out of the Mercedes car, maybe hold on to those medium tyres just a little bit better. And I feel like Hamilton would have been closer to the victory than George Russell would have been. Unnamed says, were it not for the safety car, Verstappen would have fought for the win. Ooh, this is so tricky to judge, isn't it? He failed to get that undrivable RB19 car into Q3, but looked so uncomfortable during qualifying as well. And he did have decent race pace on the hard compound tyres at the start. You're right, the safety car came at the absolute worst time for the Red Bull team. I just don't know whether he'd been able to have the pace to get right up towards the front, especially because he would have pitted later on. Carlos Sainz was still holding onto his tyres. The Mercedes cars would have been there as well. Maybe he would have got a podium at best. Boneless Watermelon, Singapore is proof that 2023 could have been one of the most exciting seasons of all time if Red Bull were out of the picture. I have to agree, Singapore once again highlighted just how close it is between the teams just behind Red Bull. I mean, take Verstappen out of the top of the table and this would be such an exciting season. Aston Martin, Mercedes, Ferrari, McLaren, even Alpine and Williams battling for wins and podiums between them. It just goes to show how close it is behind the Red Bull car and how many teams could battle with Red Bull next season if they get the winter break right. So if anything, this has just made made me so much more excited for Bahrain 2024 already. Josh says Lawson deserves a seat in Formula 1. Amazing job in these 3 races. I couldn't agree more. 3 races and 2 of them have been incredibly difficult. We look at the Netherlands, which had crazy weather changes in a car that he's barely driven. Monza was a fairly nice weekend, but then Singapore, the Grand Prix that is the hardest on the drivers and somewhere that he's never driven before, he manages to put the AlphaTauri in the points. I mean, when he came in, I said as long as he gets the AlphaTauri round and has a fairly clean weekend, he's doing okay. He's not just getting the car round, he's overtaking and finishing ahead of much more experienced drivers and now getting points. I really want to see him on the grid in 2024. Mandy says, justice for Yuki. Max ruined his qualifying and Checo ruined his race, but of course it's Red Bull, so obviously Yuki just has to take the L. It is so frustrating that basically 2 races in a row now, Yuki hasn't really taken part. Obviously Monza, he had the problem on the formation lap, and then this time around he hits Sergio Perez on the first lap of the Grand Prix, and actually, it's so weird that nobody went to represent him for that incident during qualifying, but that's kind of a separate issue with Red Bull and AlphaTauri that is so strange. I do feel for Yuki, though. He started the season so well. There was even talk of him taking the place of Sergio Perez in the full Red Bull team at some point soon, and then it's completely swapped. Now that Lawson has come in, he's grabbed the attention, and all of a sudden, it's looking like Yuki Tsunoda might not even have a seat for 2024. It could be Ricciardo and Lawson that line up as the driver pair in that AlphaTauri car. And he says, Oscar Piastri is underappreciated. P17 to P14 in 1 lap, then makes up another 7 places in the rest of the race. I know I'm a little bit biased as a McLaren fan, but Oscar has just been so much better than I would ever have hoped for. It was his first race in Singapore. He didn't have the upgrades that Lando Norris did. He was in the old spec McLaren, which is still a pretty decent car. He was so unlucky to drop out in Q1 because of the red flag. Okay, you have to get your banker lap in, but I still feel like he was unlucky. And then turning P17 into 7th place finish ahead of Sergio Perez in a Red Bull, Oscar Piastri is just the real deal. He is the future and will definitely be in that world champion bracket at some point. Random says Ocon driver of the day. I actually really like this take. Esteban Ocon surprised himself getting through into Q3 and I think surprised a few of us as well. But then once the race started, he settled into 7th place so well and just looked so comfortable. He didn't really put a foot wrong in that Alpine. I think about that pass that he did on Fernando Alonso, which was amazing to watch, the wheel-to-wheel action, but he came out on top ahead of the Spaniard, and then it was a gearbox problem that eventually put him out of the race. He would have finished ahead of his teammate Pierre Gasly. He would have been in 6th place behind Max Verstappen. I think it's just another reminder of how good Esteban Ocon can be on his day. Jamie Dawson says, both Haas cars finishing behind Lawson shows how bad Haas are at the moment. We have to remember that they did manage to pick up a point, Kevin Magnussen finishing in 10th place, but it is a tricky part of the season for Haas, especially with everybody else bringing upgrades all the time. Like even AlphaTauri and Alfa Romeo brought huge upgrades this weekend in Singapore, whereas Haas can't bring their upgrades until Austin, and they need those upgrades to deal with the tyre degradation problems that they've got, because they have massive positives. They're really good in qualifying, and they are good in the races until those tires drop off. They're not miles adrift, and if the upgrades are right, I think they can guarantee themselves 8th in the Constructors, which is a pretty good finish for Haas. Boneless Watermelon, Logan is done for. Liam has done much more in 3 races than Logan has done for the entire season. The Singapore Grand Prix was never going to be an easy weekend for Williams, but I have to agree, if you compare Logan and Liam over the last 3 races, it doesn't look good for Logan. Obviously, he crashed twice in the Netherlands. I know that the car was at fault and it was tricky conditions, but Liam had a good weekend. Then Liam finishes ahead of Logan when we're in Monza, and Alex Albon showed just how good that Williams car was in Italy. And then Liam picks up points for the first time in Singapore, where Logan is still pointless this season. I know that Williams kind of brought Logan in as their driver, but it feels like he came in just a little bit too early, and the pressure is really getting to him. Sebastian says, rated best race of the season only because Max and Red Bull didn't win a race. I agree that there were points during the race where it was quite dull. There was a lot of tyre management going on and a lot of drivers kind of waiting for somebody else to do something before they went for it. But the safety car and virtual safety car really changed the game for a lot of teams, and we saw some great wheel-to-wheel action on what is a very tricky circuit to pass in Singapore. I just think this race had the best finish of all the races so far this season because it wasn't Max Verstappen just driving away by 15 seconds at the front of the grid. And unbiased because I absolutely love the Singapore track, but I do think it was the best race so far this season. If you've got more hot takes from the Singapore Grand Prix, let me know in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching. And if you enjoyed this one, I also made a video on how I think Ferrari could be a real contender in 2024. So click that link and I'll see you over there.